Here's a question I want you to actually sit with for a second. If someone at your company left 4 years ago, do you know exactly what access they had on their very last day? Not what they were supposed to have, what they actually had. So most security teams can't answer that question, and the reason why is the entire subject of this video. So every access control program in the world is built around two moments: the day someone joins and the day someone leaves. Onboarding gets attention, offboarding gets attention. Both are easy to define, easy to check off, easy to point to into an audit. But here's the problem. The actual erosion of least privilege almost never happens on those 2 days. It happens in everything in between. And today I want to walk you through exactly how that happens, why the safeguards you probably think are catching it aren't, and what actually closes the gap. Let me paint a picture for you. So imagine a completely average employee, good at their job, never sets off a single red flag. Let's follow 4 years of their access, one reasonable decision at a time. So year one, they join a department. They get the baseline access that the role requires, totally normal. 18 months in, they get pulled onto a cross-functional project. They get temporary access to a system outside their normal scope, so they can contribute, right? The project wraps up a few months later. Now, does anyone remove that access? Almost never, because removing it was never anyone's actual job. Nothing broke, so nothing gets fixed. Then, year 2.5, they move teams, a lateral move, not a promotion, not a termination, so no offboarding workflow ever fires. Their old department's access just stays. Their new department adds new permissions on top of it. Year 3, they get pulled into an audit response. They get short-term access to a reporting system just for the audit. The audit closes. Guess what doesn't close with it? By year 4, this employee who has done absolutely nothing wrong is quietly sitting on access that maps to 4 different roles, only one of which is their actual current job. And here's the part that should worry you. If that account ever gets compromised, an attacker isn't getting into one job's worth of systems. They're getting into 4. Now, you may be thinking, don't companies have, a control for this already? An access review, maybe. Well, they do. And here's what that control looks like in practice more often than anyone wants to admit. So a manager gets a spreadsheet, 40 names on it, each one with a list of current permissions. The manager is asked to certify, is this still appropriate? And in a lot of cases, that manager scrolls down, clicks approve on the whole list, and moves on with their day. 5 minutes, review complete. But I want to be clear, this isn't a story about a lazy or careless manager. This is a structural problem. To actually evaluate whether a permission still makes sense, you need to understand what that permission grants and whether the person's current job still needs it. Most managers were never trained to do that, and were never given the time to do it properly, even if they were. The control exists on paper. The judgment behind it often doesn't. There are 2 more specific failure points worth naming here. First, temporary and project-based access almost never comes with a built-in expiration date, which means removing it depends entirely on a human remembering to do it later. That's 3 separate failure points: remembering, noticing, and acting. Any of those can fail, and usually does. Second, service accounts. These are credentials tied to an automation or integration, not to a specific person. Someone sets up to connect two systems, right? And years later, that person has left the company, but the service account is still running with the same permissions because nothing about a human leaving triggers a review of automated processes they once configured. So, what actually closes this gap? 3 things. Number 1, any access granted for a project or a temporary need should have a default expiration date, built in at the moment it's granted, not something someone has to remember to revoke later. If it's still needed when it expires, renewing it is a 5-minute action. If it's not needed, it just disappears automatically. Number 2, Lateral moves need to trigger the same kind of review that offboarding does. If someone changes teams, that should prompt an actual side-by-side comparison. Here's their old access. Here's what their new access, their new role actually requires, not just piling new permissions on top of old ones. Number 3, access reviews need better questions. Instead of asking manager, does this look fine? Ask something harder to rubber stamp. What does this person's current role actually require? And does their current access match it? That's a real question. It forces for real evaluation. Here's what I want you to sit with as we wrap up. Nobody decided that hypothetical employee should end up with 4 roles worth of access. No single approval looked at on its own was unreasonable. Even every individual decision made sense in the moment it was made, right? The risk built up entirely through the absence of a removal process, not through one bad call. And that's exactly what makes this kind of risk, right, so dangerous. It's invisible. It doesn't show up until an audit forces the question, or an investigation forces the question, or worst case, a breach forces the question that nobody had been asking the whole time. Does this person's access still make sense? And if not, how long has that been true? If this is the first time you thought about the gap, between onboarding and offboarding this way, I wrote a full breakdown on the blog this week, links in the description, and it goes deeper into each of these failure points and what a real access review process should look like exactly. So if you're working toward a career in GRC security, this is exactly the kind of thinking that separates someone who can pass a certification exam from someone who can actually walk into an audit and explain a real risk. That distinction matters more than people realize. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of breakdown every week, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.